All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining us at our second Female Founder Friday. I'm Kat Mañalac, a partner at Y Combinator. So the goal here is to bring together the community of women founders and future founders and find ways that we can help one another. So in this series, we want to highlight and learn from founders who are or have built and scaled their companies. So today you're going to meet three of my favorite founders, and they were all also visiting partners at Y Combinator. And so they're going to answer questions that you sent to us, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So Tracy, do you want to start?
Sure thing. These are also some of my favorite people in the world on this panel. So my name is Tracy Young. I co-founded a company called PlanGrid. PlanGrid builds simple, beautiful software for the construction industry. And I led the company for 8 years before it joining Autodesk. And I recently left Autodesk.
And she sold for almost $1 billion.
Thank you.
Thanks for rounding up. I like when you guys round up.
And Tracy was also a visiting partner in the winter 2020 batch of YC.
So I'm Talia. I founded a company called Elle. We make personal care products made from organic materials. And for everyone we sell, we make one accessible to a woman who needs it. We have expanded into 20 countries around the world, have made over 250 million products accessible, and were acquired by Procter & Gamble last year, where I remain an advisor.
And most recently, Talia was also a visiting partner for the Winter 20 batch. All right, Holly.
Hi, everybody. My name is Holly. I co-founded a company in 2006 that started as a corporate social network and exited as a mobile gaming company. We did about 3 pivots along the way. And probably some of our largest games that you guys might, if you play games, you might have heard of, which is Marvel, Contest of Champions, but we've also built games for franchises such as The Hobbit, Fast and Furious, you probably any PG-13 focused towards maybe men, some women. We've probably talked to those franchises and done that. And I was visiting partner for the between 2018 and 19.
Let's start with a couple questions from the folks watching. So I'm starting with, and I'm sorry if I butcher your name, but this is from Ania Pucciata. She said, what initially motivated you to start your companies? And did that motivation, what kept you going, change as the companies grew?
Yeah, good question. PlanGrid started off as a fun project. My friends and I just wanted to work together and build something together. And it would be one of the more successful projects. And we also built a lot of useless things that were just fun for ourselves. I think the motivation early on in 2011, 2012 was just being able to hang out with my best friends. And then I'd say over the years, the motivation would sort of shift from that. That was always there, working with people, for our customers, with the team. It would later shift to this strong desire to win. I had this chip on my shoulder. I didn't want to lose. And I also felt like so much trust was given to me by the team, by my investors. And I felt so lucky to be able to lead the company.
So I was in the nonprofit world. So I worked for the Red Cross and the UN, and I was documenting disasters and humanitarian crises. And for me, that was, what I thought would have the biggest impact. And I'm really always passionate about women's rights, women's reproductive rights, all of that. And then eventually started following the work of Muhammad Yunus and the social enterprise movement and public benefit corps, and started to realize how you could enact so much change through business, and got really inspired by that. And then at the same time, I eventually documented the effects of HIV and AIDS on women and girls, and just realized that there was this big issue with stockouts of basic products like condoms, like pads, and that was holding women and girls back. So I kind of put the two together where I was getting really, really frustrated because there was a lot of talk around how women and girls are our greatest agents of change and development and our greatest untapped resource. When it came to issues like sex and periods, we were shaming them. We really weren't providing them with the tools that they needed. And so decided to very naively start this company. That was my motivation.
Holly.
Yeah, so total, there were 4 of us founders, and one of them happened to be my cousin. And so we grew up together a lot. I knew I was much more on the product design side. I had a ton of ideas, but like just did not know much about business. So I went to him and I said, look, this sounds like I have all these ideas. I think it's a good time to maybe start a business. My personal motivation was, honestly, I was working at a big company. I was at AOL, and after 3 years, nothing launched, and it was just very disheartening. And that's usually what happens when you work at a big company. So I was itching to just try something, and I was in Silicon Valley. I think there was just so much that was happening in that year, particularly YouTube sold for $1 billion. And then, so once we got together, immediately he's like, this is great, but we need somebody to build it. So I knew just the person because I had worked with him before, and we had worked on a lot of side projects together. And then we pulled in a fourth co-founder who had to do front end. So we had a lot of different skill sets is what we needed. And we started working on a really terrible idea. It sounded great at the time. It was a corporate social network. And basically after 8 months and 3 product iterations later, it was like a complete failure. There was like only 1,400 registered users, like 5 daily active users, and 20 cease and desist letters from lawyers. So it was pretty clear that we could have closed up shop or decided to continue working together. And I think our story might be a little bit unique because we went through another pivot in building fan communities for TV shows and sports teams before we ended up actually into games. And I think our motivation at that point, which might have been a little bit kind of like Tracy's, we used to have this saying of like, go big or go home. And at every single turn, because we've almost died like several times. And in fact, before we even moved into games, it was really because of the financial crisis in 2008. We had like our Series B term sheet already signed. All they needed to do was to wire the money. And the day they were supposed to wire the money was the same day that Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns like crashed to $1. So we like, suffice to say, they never gave us the money. They pulled out. It's probably just like it was 3 weeks ago, literally. A lot of people being scared and pulled out. And that's when we started looking towards something that was much more sustainable, much more profitable, and something that leveraged our skill sets, which was building games on Facebook. And that's how we ended up into building a mobile gaming company. So I think we just became in too deep at some point too. We kept on weirdly raising more rounds. We started hiring more people, and kind of like what Tracy was saying, there were so many people that entrusted us to almost kind of keep going, and eventually, get to a point where this made sense to exit the company for it to continue and build value for the players.
So kind of going back to the very, very beginning, what was the very first step that you had to take in order to start the company? Like, what was the very first thing you did?
It's kind of funny because I feel like my personal take on it is the company kind of sneaks up on you. Like oftentimes I was doing some side projects with some people. I tend to be somebody who works better in pairs. So for me, little did I know that the time I was working with one of our co-founders who became the CTO, we were actually doing, like, we were starting a company. We just didn't know it. I'd be curious if Tracy had that same thing, because she goes, oh, we did a lot of flops. Because even before our mega flop, like not the flop, the one where we quit all our jobs for, like we did some other stuff that were just like side projects. He had this side startup that was going nowhere. And I think that the company, like that was the very first thing, was like kind of choosing the people. Our story was choosing the people first, and then the ideas came and shifted. I don't, maybe.
For us, it was when we quit our jobs, when we decided to, live off our savings, because what that does is it puts like a time limit on it, because we couldn't live off our savings forever. And then also, I think when we had convinced our first 20 users to test our thing out, so not pay us, but to use the thing that we were going to build for them, that was when it became real. Because suddenly, not only did we have this time pressure, we also had people that we didn't want to let down, because again, we felt like they had no reason to trust us, and they did. I mean, it was, just testing out software. In hindsight, it's not that big of a deal, but it was enormous to us at that point.
So it sounds like you both sort of started with the team first, and you were sort of working together on various ideas. Talia, you're a solo founder. What was the very first step for you?
Yeah, I was listening and I was like, wow, that is so much smarter than the way that I started. Like, I started completely the wrong way. Because I had no idea what I was doing. Like, all I knew how to do was storytell, right? And so like, That is the only thing like I applied to, and I just like went out and told that story like before I even had a product. So I was like very much the emperor with no clothes on, just like walking around talking about a condom company that didn't exist. Like we didn't have a product, but like I had a lot of anger at that time. And I was really, it's that like Gloria Steinem quote that I keep on going to, like, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. Like I was really pissed off, that like Trojan at the time was like the market leader and was basically like this rape story. And like that, that it just all felt like very disempowering for women, and that women were part of the conversation, and these products weren't accessible. And so I was talking about that story, and I was talking about it as if it was real. And then it began to be, basically it became more real in the world when all of these people started reacting to it and then pre-ordering before I had product. And then that began to really put the pressure on. And by the way, there was like a Forbes article about this thing, and like I didn't have a physical product, right? Which is ridiculous. Like, don't do that. But it did put the pressure on me to then go and actually like execute and make it happen, and like put that down payment for that first order, which was like, from my own bank account, and figure it out.
Know if you did it incorrectly though, Talia, like you went to find customers first for this product. I mean, I know we were really dumb. We raised money and we hadn't even built product, and then we built the product and we're like, oh crap. And then we're like, oh shoot, we got to figure out how to make a return on the investors' money, and they wanted outsized returns. Oh man, now we're stuck. So in some ways, it goes back to like YC, and we talk a lot about like making something that people wanted. I mean, I don't think it was the wrong way. It's never wrong to tell your customer. That's what I'll say.
I appreciate that, Holly. Thank you.
So a question that came up from, Kalechi Ogbana. It's scary to start a company. And so did you ever have imposter syndrome or fear around it in the beginning? And if so, how did you overcome it?
Not at the beginning. I think we were all naive. You have to be a little bit stupid and naive to want to start a company. Just do not know what you're in for, especially if you have any success at all, which these ladies will tell you. It's just, I think for all of us, we probably imagined a much shorter journey with a lot of success. And it's like, wow, almost a decade of my life went into this. So the question was, did I feel an imposter syndrome? For sure. Not at the beginning though. In the beginning, it was, nothing mattered. I didn't have investors, I only had users that I needed to make happy. That seemed easy enough, or at least naively, it seemed easy enough to find product market fit. Later on though, when there's a team staring at you, 450 people staring at you, investors poking through every single one of your numbers saying it's not good enough, and then still trying to ask for money, that's when imposter syndrome really set in for me.
I was scared. I'll be honest. I remember the CEO, he was telling me, I was still working, and the CEO said, Holly, I said, hey, can we just do this as a side hustle to see if this is something that people would want? And he goes, no, we're going to move too slow. I'm going to go raise money for this. And there's no way I could raise money for a team that's just working part-time. So you have to quit. I was like, oh my goodness. It's probably nice that we were related, because he could probably use that language with me. But for me, it was a lot of pressure right from the beginning, because we had raised money before kind of doing that. But we were also, to Tracy's point, we were a very naive team. None of us had managed anybody before. We didn't really know. Like a good portion of it had been in product for larger companies. So there was a lot of like just naivete. But I was with Tracy in that early on, you're just kind of doing the stuff. And so once you realize that outside perspectives don't matter as much, because it's just so much smaller, and it's just you and the customers, and you keep building and building. And then once it gets bigger, once like we grew our company pretty large to 1,500 employees, like there were just victims of politics happened. There was just so much stuff. And at that point, I think that's when you start questioning yourself, because you're just like, oh, this is the first time I'm hearing this. I thought I was very successful, but now success looks very different. There's this thing called executive presence that I need to have now, or something of that sort. And I think that's where all these things kind of start popping in there, because what you did before isn't good enough now. And it's true, like the organization changes, your product changes, everything changes.
The role specifically changes. Being a founder, you just end up doing things, and then you work really hard, you work around the clock, you don't sleep, and you can make yourself into 10 people in one person. And that seems doable. And then suddenly you have to become a leader. Mm-hmm. And part of being a leader is not doing anything but talking and leading. And for people who haven't done it before, it doesn't make any sense.
And it's also hard because you're so busy doing, right? And you're like, this is like, I've been judged on what I've done so far. And look at all these millions of users who love us. Like, that's not good enough. I have to do these other things, or because you're right, it's another staple.
Yeah, like both Holly and Tracy are touching upon it. You're definitely like sprinting for a really long time, and you're still sprinting and you're still sprinting, and you're like, I thought I'd be here by now. And so, there is this like confidence that you kind of have to embody at points when you are questioning yourself and there's doubt. And even though like the grit is there in your belly, like you still have there is this question of like, am I not enough? These stories that we tell ourselves that are really, that are bound to creep in because we're human, and ultimately like a startup is an idea, and it's convincing a bunch of people to follow you and follow that idea and then invest in that idea. And like, so, and you have to hold the vision for that as the founder, right? And that's a lot to carry. So there are bound to be moments where, you question it all and question yourself. I think that having, at least for me, and I think for Holly and Tracy too, like having a really deep sense of like purpose and why you're doing what you're doing is important to get you through those moments. Because even if you feel like it's kind of like fake it till you make it, or if you're bigger than you are, at least you're doing it for something you really, really believe in. That'll kind of give you the energy to continue or push through those moments. And if you're not aligned in that way, like I speak to founders who sometimes like have the expertise and are like, I feel like I should be working in this space. And it's like, well, do you want to work in this space? Like, will you be proud of, like, because like what we're saying, it'll probably take maybe like a decade or much longer than you thought. Will that time will have been like well spent and truly aligned with your purpose?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's like a guiding light, that the guiding light actually helps us focus versus these awful stories we tell ourselves about not being good enough.
And I will say,
totally not productive.
Yeah, it's totally not productive. I will say also cut yourself some slack on what the guiding light might look like. For me personally, I'll be honest, we built games that it wasn't things that I would play, and it wasn't our target market to do like casual games. But for me, there were so many things about wanting to stay with the company. Partly I really enjoyed working with not only just the founders, but building a team. Like soon the organization and building the culture became like my mission and my baby. So that it doesn't have to always look exactly kind of the same. If the guiding light could be something a little different. And I've seen this with companies that pivot a bit, where it's like the team gets really committed to one another and they just kind of end up going through a lot of different things together because they enjoy working together.
So you've, each built companies and had an exit, and also, have spent time working with YC alumni, YC founders, and advising companies. So what is something, you would, now thinking about all of, the past 10 years of your lives, if you could go back in time and tell yourself, as a, first-time founder, as an early stage founder, one thing that you wish you'd known back then, what would it be?
Two things. Number one is find a problem that is worthy of a decade of your life. Because if you have any success at all, that's how long it's going to take at minimum. And then secondly, I would tell myself, I'm 35 now. I would love to be able to time warp back to like when I was like 19, 20 years old, and just like look her in the eyes and say like, fucking just stop beating yourself up. You are good enough with all your flaws, with all your imperfections. You are the most perfect version of Tracy. You can live like that happily. Because it took me way too long to figure that out. And I think we talk about imposter syndrome, and like here are 3 women who feel it so strongly. And then I think for me, it just, at some point, I just sort of let it go. And that's all it was. to get over it.
Talia?
I'm like, does it have to be one thing? Because I wish I knew so many things.
Yeah. Tell us all the things.
Tell all the things. Okay. So one thing that I would tell myself is like, stop getting distracted. Like I did all of the things, right? I had like all of these ideas of what I want, this movement that I wanted to start, right? Where like women were coming together and where these products, all of these different products would be accessible. And I could see the roadmap that was so huge. And that's important. Like have the, you know, the big idea, like in sight, but like don't get distracted with all of the stuff that like keeps you from, especially like in the first place, in the first stage we're talking about, you know, just like building that MVP and getting it out, for example, or getting too distracted with like press stuff or conferences that people want you to go to or panels that people want you to talk on. Although this panel is like well worth our time, but in general, when you're a founder and you're building, you know, a company, it's like there's all of these distractions and they're not actually like helping you get product market fit, which is really what you should be focusing on in the beginning. And if you don't have product market fit, don't get too attached to your idea. Like begin to try other things and see what sticks. It took me a while to do that. Like I was so, I believed so strongly that it had to be true, you know, that it took me a while to develop a line of products that people were actually purchasing. What else? I would say I had the issue, like Talia, and maybe there are people out there that also have this issue, but as a photojournalist, I was like such a independent like actor. I would go out and document these disasters and edit my photos and then send them to my editor. And like, I was always just kind of like a free bird and I didn't collaborate with other people. And I love that I was never dependent on anyone else, you know? And, you know, then learning the value of just like bringing people in and trusting them and not trying to do everything yourself. That took me forever to learn. I mean, people told me that over and over again, but to actually embody it and do it and begin to delegate those responsibilities and hire those key team members, that took me forever. So, you know, if I, you know, were to do it again, I think that I would bring people in sooner. I would, in general, like keep people in your camp. So whether those are team members or advisors or investors, like that network, invite them in.
I like that. Holly.
I wish probably somebody would have told me that it was a marathon at sprint pace at like a 10-degree incline. Like, I think if you end up in the venture capital route, it certainly is. If you end up taking money from somebody, particularly VCs, the demands on you are just ludicrous sometimes. Like sometimes like I just think about like we were constantly trying to be profitable and grow, and it was just crazy all the time. And just kind of like, it was 11 years of this, of just kind of running at just this pace and not really knowing kind of what the end result would be, like, you know? And so I think that's kind of the speed and like how long you have to endure that speed for. Who knows? Maybe if somebody told me that, I wouldn't have done it. You know, I'd been like, peace out, man. So there is a dose of nativity. And then I think the second thing I wish I would have more known, it's not that people didn't tell me, but more known is just like, it's not about you. There's so many things, and it might be my personality that I tend to internalize, like something went wrong. Oh, that's my fault. Partly because, you know, you think you can fix it. But what happens is like the voice just ends up coming up and it kind of creeps into the you're not good enough category. And all my other founders were male. I was in a very heavily male dominated industry, probably a lot like Tracy. And so it just gets bombarded day in and day out, like just so subtly on certain things, little things of like, how come there's nobody that looks like me? And for a while, like a great example of this is by the time you get to a certain organization size, you have performance reviews. We had like these 360-degree performance reviews. And like, basically my reviews came back and there was about 40 to 50% of it was how I dressed and my appearance. And I was like, initially I was like, oh, this is great. I could get a makeover and this will be great. No problem at all. You know, this will be fine. And then
I realized that it wasn't just a makeover, because it was an and. Like, I had to look good. I have to fit this impression of what they think a female exec of a gaming company looks like, right? On top of that, like, I work at a freaking gaming company where like pants are optional in the studio. I mean, those people are like whatevs, right? Like we used to have like a studio exec. He would wear flip-flops every day, and he never got judged by his appearance, right? Like, we had another guy who was like successful playwright. His shirt was always like untucked and everything like that. And I'm like, wow, I don't get caught like any slack. But I had internalized all that thinking like, I'm just this terrible exec. But reality is looking back, it's just not about me. It really wasn't. Like, there's so many things where it's not about me. So not to blame myself too much, and at the same time to know that, you know, you have the freedom to be yourself and you're good enough.
Tracy and Holly, you both sort of touched on the fact that, I mean, and even Talia, that you are enough, and like sort of what helped you really internalize that?
Oh,
I think
there wasn't a moment, right? I think it did take a lot of work. It took a lot of like internalization and a lot of walks in the woods, a lot of meditation, as trite as it sounds. But it was, for me, it was actually, maybe the moment was when a friend that I was confiding in, actually wasn't even a friend, it was an executive coach, who's my good friend now. He said, for someone who has so little ego, you sure have a lot of negative ego. It's like, what the fuck is that? I was so upset. And he just told me that, like, you know, like this small problem, instead of just like moving past it and like going back and leading the company, you're so hung up on it, and you keep talking about this mistake you've made as if it's like the whole world. And it's not. It's just a fucking mistake you made. So learn from it, don't do it again, and move on. And that's what he called negative ego. And I had a ton of it, that, you know, I was the one who was causing all these problems, and the center of gravity was around me all the time, instead of looking out at the team, at the problem, at our industry, for our customers. And I think having to go back to that over and over and over again was a really important, I guess, the really important work I did to improve myself.
I'll be honest, I'm still on the journey.
Yeah, I'm still on the journey too.
Okay. I was like, it is like a process to even kind of get to where you're at. I highly recommend executive coaching. I highly recommend any spiritual practice, from meditation to prayer to go to church. I go to church, I pray. Those types of things, like, there are 80,000 thoughts that go through your mind daily. And like, as a leader, your whole job is to basically lead. But how can you lead if you're having problems managing yourself, right? And that's going to be the best way you could scale, is if you can manage yourself and be able to kind of think clearly. And I think I had the same problem with Tracy as well, meaning just the fact that I internalized many things, and this delves into a lot of probably childhood, or probably culture, so many things that if you have a therapist, that's another, I think so being culturally Asian, we were never great on therapists until executive coaches. And I was like, this is great. So if you have an opportunity to have an executive coach, I think they're so fabulous, because they help you kind of dig into helping you become a better leader. And half of the stuff is literally like office therapy. For me, because I started a company with family, there are just so many things that, even in all honesty, I'm still processing of like, oh, this was maybe about our relationship more so than the company, or this is something more about me than really what happened. And there's so many things you realize that are just literally out of your control. Like, and this was a powerful exercise that I did one day, where I just took a list and I said things that I can control and things I cannot control. And you realize how many little things, like things that you just cannot control. I mean, things microscopic, like the virus, look at how powerful that is. And we have very little control. So I think like a lot of kind of the inner work in many ways that will help you scale to become a better leader, particularly as your company gets bigger. The first thing is to find product market fit, which is making something that people want. And hopefully if you guys all do that, then the next the next like kind of rung or the next mini game is to become a leader, is to lead.
Yeah, the only thing that I'll add to that is that for me, finding peers or other founders, specifically I had a women founder group that really just like we mirrored back to each other, you know, what was happening, and like kind of checked ourselves when, because there were a lot of times where we would start a conversation with, is this normal? And then we would, you know,
no, that's super helpful.
Like sanity check, you know, and the reality was, yes, some of it is normal, but it's totally fucked up, right? So like when I hear Holly say, oh, you got feedback about what you were wearing, like 50, I get so mad. And then like me mirroring back to her, well, don't let that distract you, because that's ridiculous. Like that's not worth a second of your time. You know, just like me, and then she can say, and then she can put it aside. There's so many times, there's so many things that we have to deal with as founders that are women, whether it's some kind of discrimination that we're experiencing when we're fundraising, whether it's some kind of weird office dynamic that's occurring with the team and expectations, or it's like life, you know, or it's like family building and pregnancy and things like that, that specifically like us as women founders are experiencing, and we need community around. I say like try to find that, because it's super valuable. It has been for me.
I could see that, Talia, particularly because I think you know, when you're just the only one there, it's really hard. Like I was the only female on the founding team, so oftentimes I just thought it was me. Like I have the problem. And I can only imagine, Tracy, you as the CEO, where everyone says you're responsible, you're accountable, so it has to be you. And to kind of tease out what is it that is kind of common because of a quality that you cannot change. That's like incredibly, I can see that being so powerful. We had less female founders at the time when I was doing it.
So Talia's group of female founder friends, they kicked off the Female Founder Friday series. So we have a recording of it. Happy to send it to anyone. But watching it last week was just so heartwarming, because they all know each other so well and know how, like, who is good at what, and they would, you know, bounce questions off each other and make fun of each other. And I just think that like having that support network throughout the life of your company is probably just worth so much.
Mm-hmm. Journey is way too hard to go on it alone. Way too hard.
Literally a week ago, a woman founder friend like called me and she was like, this person quit and I'm crying and I can't stop crying and I don't know why. You know, like they were like, family, why would they quit? You know, and like processing that, you know, and just because like she doesn't have a safe place. She can't go to her team with that. And she could go, I mean, like Tracy has a very unique version of this. Like typically you can't go to your partner because they don't know what it's like to be a founder. Right? You can, and they'll be loving, but they won't be able to give you that same advice or that feeling of, oh, I know when that happened to me, this is what I did to cope, you know? And it's okay to feel this way, like mourn it out, cry it out, and then like get yourself back together, because here are the 3 things you're gonna have to say to your team.
All right, so because we are in applications reading season at Y Combinator, we have a few questions that came in about YC applications and like what stands out to you about teams. Like when you've read, YC apps or when you've interviewed them, like what is memorable to you? What has stood out?
So for me, one of the things that really stands out is progress in a short amount of time. And what I mean by progress isn't like, oh, I decided to code 10,000 lines of code. Then I got some PR. I'm talking about like I bet you I didn't read your application, Talia, but that would have impressed me that you got these pre-orders before even building the product. Like in my mind, I'm like, wow, because reality is engineering can build whatever you want. And that's kind of the bad part of it. That's the great thing. And that's the bad thing. Right. And, but like to be able to like get customers, like I'm super impressed when founders are able to get customers before a single line of code is written. Now that's not to say that, hey, I do think you should have a technical founder through YC, like if you're applying through YC, because we just see that they're able to make even more progress during the batch. And that's one of the things that they do really, really look for. And that's really one of the reasons why it's to help you make progress as quickly as possible. There are exceptions, though. I will throw that out. Kat's probably really good about talking about the exceptions, and our stats show it that there's exceptions. Like Talia, I don't think you're a solo non-tech founder, and they took her, and it would be the progress. I would have been like, wow, this is great. So I get super impressed when reading those types of applications.
I think good communication skills are really important. I think about some of the best leaders I've worked with. They just were really good at communicating, and it helps with the job. It helps with leading. It helps with fundraising. It helps with convincing a bunch of people to work really hard for you. And so if I can understand what you're building in like the first 2 minutes, the first minute of your video, and then just reading a few paragraphs and completely understanding the problem you're trying to solve, like that really stands out. Because so often we, maybe because it's it's Y Combinator's application, so we're going to write like we don't talk. We're going to write like a more impressive sounding version of ourselves that we think should sound like. And more likely than not, it's just a lot of fluff and just a lot of wasted words.
I totally agree with you. When we've gone back and read a lot of the applications from some of the companies and teams that have done the best, and almost like uniformly, they're great communicators. They can, in very few words, describe what they're doing in a way that anyone can understand. It's very clear and succinct. So I that's one of the things I think that stands out to me the most as well.
And that ability to distill words is, I think, useful when it comes to building really simple, useful products that does exactly what it needs to do.
I absolutely agree. I think that when you think about YC, you're just reading so many applications, and it's the equivalent of me like saying, Elle is a personal care company that makes products for the modern woman. It's like, who knows what personal care really is that's outside of consumer goods? And like, who is the modern woman? Like that's all like marketing fluff, right? And that's like me pitching maybe consumers, but that's not me pitching investors. So it's like taking all of that language and stripping it down. And sometimes when you strip it down, it's not as big as you want it to be. But remember that what we're looking for, or YC in general is looking for in a YC application is like a concise idea, or I should actually say, all investment comes down to one, an exceptional founder. So show that you're exceptional in some way, show that you're formidable in some way, especially if you're not technical, because like Holly just pointed out, I was like a single non-technical founder with like a box of condoms when I applied. Who knows how I got into YC? Like till this day, I'm like, what did I put in my application? And then in the notes, supposedly, they just said like you were formidable, just like nothing would stop her, right? So make sure that you have that energy. So it's always an exceptional founder with 2, an insight. So what is your insight? Like make that clear. And this is when pitching any investor. And 3, it's like in a market that's poised for growth. If you're working in a really small market, then that's going to be a concern. It could be a really good idea that has some traction. That's a great small business idea or a great lifestyle business, but that's not going to ever become or have the potential to become a huge company. Then YC is not going to be interested. So always think about those 3 things.
I like it. Kavya Ravikanti asked, at what stage did you apply to YC? So Tracy and Talia, do you want to take that?
We had nothing. We just had an idea, maybe a prototype that wasn't really working. No revenue, no customers, no beta users. That's when we applied to YC.
I will say, though, that you applied with an idea that you were sort of building to solve your own problem. And so you had an insight. You had an insight about the construction space. And so you certainly had that.
Yes. And then within 3 months, we got a product launched and we got revenue. A lot of it, actually. Progress.
And Tracy is also just super impressive, right? When you look at her profile and her background, it's like they looked at her as a founder and they said, I want to back this person. Maybe she'll build this, maybe she'll build something else, but like I want to get in on whatever she's building. If you're that, great. If you're me and you're like a photojournalist that suddenly decided to start a company and they're just like, what? She has no business background. She's not technical. There's like nothing there. Then, you got to have traction. You've got to have like proof of product market fit. You have to show, hey, like people, this is, bananas. This is just a no-brainer. And when I applied to YC, so first of all, I would have never applied to YC. Like I didn't know what YC was. That wasn't in my like world few, right? I happened to get connected with Michael Seibel, who really encouraged me to apply. And when I think about this in terms of like a message to women founders, I think too often we just don't put ourselves out there. We don't apply. We don't ask for the recommendation if we don't think that we're qualified. A lot of studies show that if we don't qualify, we just kind of, just don't try, when a lot of men founders tend to. And so, it took someone encouraging me, and then my partner at the time saying, "Y Combinator." I remember we were in a, he's like, "That's a big deal. You should do that." And I was like, "Well, what is it?" I was like, "An incubator. I don't know." And it wasn't until I, looked into it and then actually went through the process that I saw all of the value that was there. And I have to say, loved the experience and got so much out of it.
Moving into a different topic, hard times. So it's a hard time for a lot of folks out there right now. And, we have Tuong Van Lay asks, what has kept you motivated in the past during hard times? How do you keep yourself motivated and moving forward?
There's been so many nights and days where I'm just hidden in a room in a corner, just crying my eyes out because it's hard. It's emotionally hard. I feel like I'm not doing my job. I feel like I'm letting everyone down. I feel like I've just massively, royally fucked up somehow. And what kept us going? It felt like we didn't have a choice. I had no choice but to get my shit together. And I think part of it is just this learned ability to manage my own emotions. And then again, too, as I said earlier, I didn't want to let people down. I felt incredibly lucky to have been given the opportunity that I was given. And I just could not waste that. And I think that was a huge driver for me. And I also knew that if things are feeling really bad, it's probably going to get better soon. Maybe it's going to feel a little worse for a little bit longer, but it's going to be better because that's just the natural cycle. And by the way, if it's feeling really good, something really bad's about to happen.
Yeah.
This constant cycle of that.
Okay, so stuff that has gotten me through the really rough times. As a founder, you have your story that you tell people. And you find yourself telling the same story what feels like millions of times. It's just you could say it in your sleep, right? It's your little pitch. And you try to find joy in it, but after a while you just begin to feel like, okay, here I go again. You need to know what I do. Learning to enjoy that story, but also finding the story you tell yourself is important, I think. The story that I would tell myself is why I'm really doing this goes back to our give back program and making these products accessible. And this is the why, that makes this feel very fulfilling to me. It could be team members. It could be something else. So just knowing what that story is so you can go back to it, I think is important. In other really tough times, community has been really, really important. When I felt just really beaten up and really, really tired, having those friends around, those mentors around that could reflect back to me, you're doing awesome, because you can be really, really hard on yourself.
Holly.
I think early on, the motivation was really because the team was smaller. So there was a huge commitment to one another. It was almost like a very family feel and a familial type thing. And so you could do a lot of things like fit everybody in a room, play board game nights, all of those things. Sadly, as the company gets larger, it's a little bit more depressing in many ways, the kinds of problems you go through, because it's you're very alone at that time, right? You can definitely talk to your founders, but your founders are all doing some different role at this point. It's not exactly the same. You're managing a team that are professionals coming from the outside. And those, for me, in terms of those types of the motivation that was there, was really, I wanted to be kind of like what Tracy was saying. There was something very special about Kabam, and I just didn't want to miss being a part of it. There was no way I would ever get this opportunity to lead an organization of this size into something of this industry, something very new. If I just left and went to go work at Google or Microsoft, it just wouldn't have been I wouldn't have learned as much. That's the thing, that the slope would have been just not there. And so that was definitely for me very self-motivating, and my motivations kind of changed. The other thing I would do, and this kind of outside of a lot of, just any type of things with your exec coach is super helpful, community, prayer, all those types of things. One of the things that I would totally encourage you to do is actually write down when things were really shitty, like as you're going through it, because it's kind of funny. Sometimes because we were a company that we literally almost died several times. And sometimes I would look back and I'm like, oh my God, thank God we didn't do X, Y, and Z. I could even see a silver lining in not getting the Series B investment, because they were associated with a media company. They probably wanted us to do fan communities, and there probably would be no way we could pivot into games. And it just would have been a death march into creating something that was ad supported in a recession. That just would have been really bad. So it's kind of, I would highly encourage just to like, in some ways, journaling can also help you work out all the emotions that you're feeling around it. That and then you could kind of look back and kind of encourage yourself. It's like, yeah, remember that time when we almost died and something better happened about it? Or remember this time where this person was giving you a lot of problems, but this is kind of like how you became stronger, or this is how the situation changed. Because you just don't know. And most of the time these failures are trying to teach you something, or challenges, maybe not even failures. The challenges are really there. There's always some type of deeper inner work that's going on. And if you can learn about that, you'll just be so much better at the next challenge and the next challenge. They keep coming up because you haven't learned your lesson, I think. That's how I feel. The universe is like, hey.
Okay, so before we have to wrap up, one thing you guys are optimistic about.
Like right now.
Yeah, like right now. Optimistic, or something that's made you happy in the past week.
So one of the things, I know this is really bad, and I want to encourage the founders who are on here. This is while it's a really hard time building your company right now in this current stage, I think the amount of focus that the crisis has really put on startups to be default alive, and there's a great essay by Paul Graham who writes about just search default dead or default alive, and trying to get yourself into that position as soon as possible. You guys are already kind of on your way. You have a team already. You have something there. You're small enough to be able to pivot and capture a lot of opportunity. And I guarantee if you can survive this by being incredibly focused, you can become the next multi-billion-dollar company. I mean, like, I'm living proof, because we pivoted into games during recession, and we became $1 billion company.
PlanGrid was founded during a downturn also.
There you go. This is where it's time.
What am I optimistic about? I'm optimistic that there's over 200 people watching this right now, and I'm assuming most of them are women. As we look at just the problems and challenges of our world right now, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we're likely going to go into a very deep recession. But I look at the countries that I really respect, and they're led by women. And I don't think that goes unnoticed. And I just hope that, like, if you can look at the three of us and we've founded companies, like, if we're just like we're normal people. We didn't know what the hell we were doing. We just really wanted to solve our problem, and we did. And like, you can do it too. And so I'm optimistic that I think there's going to be more women stepping up to leadership roles and becoming experts in their domains and solving problems for the world, because we need it.
I love that. And on that note too, my dad, who is not, he's like a more conservative man, texted me recently, and he was like, did you see the thing about women ruling all the best countries, during coronavirus? And like, he keeps talking about Michelle Obama, and he's like, I really think women should like run the world. Like, this is a great data points we're getting. And I was like, wow, hopefully we're making some real progress here. Talia.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with, what Tracy and you are saying and what Holly is saying. I think the world needs more women leading, and that just women have it like a unique way of like collaborating, that the world just needs more of. And in this time, I feel there's something about this pandemic that just kind of like strips away the extra stuff and makes you focus on what matters. And it's kind of fertile ground to create some really incredible companies. So I have a lot of confidence that some of the best companies are going to be founded now. They're not going to be the companies that raise a shit ton of money that they don't necessarily need. They're going to be the ones that are really scrappy and really smart and formidable. And I'm excited to watch it unfold.
So thank you, Tracy, Talia, and Holly. And so for anyone watching, if you'd like to join another Female Founder Friday, we'll post the next date on our social feeds, in YC's newsletter, and on Alpha. If you have feedback on the format, because it's a new format, feel free to reach out to Tamana Kamani, YC's new outreach manager. She's TAMANNA at ycombinator.com. And if you'd like to keep the conversation going, many of the women in the YC community are part of Alpha, which is a community online where women can talk. And it's a lot of women in tech, a lot of female founders, so you can find us there. It's elpha.com. And thanks to all of you. Bye.
Bye, guys.